In the last lesson, we discussed the importance of you depositing your cash into a savings or a retirement account. I also warned you that right now the inflation rates are high and the interest rates for high yield savings accounts are low. Unfortunately, we can't protect our money from inflation by keeping it in a high yield savings account right now. Yet, we still want you to take your cash for an emergency fund and put it in a high yield savings account, since having an emergency fund is a prerequisite for investing. Now, before you start thinking, what again? Let me explain. When investing in the stock market, you want to do so for the long term. At minimum, you want to keep your dinero invested for at least 1 year to avoid short-term capital gain taxes. This means that if you have an unexpected expense, you want to be able to withdraw that money from a savings account instead of an investment account. And trust me, emergencies will come up. Flat tires happen, families need dinero, medical co-payments, jobs are lost, etc. Yeah, that's just life. Emergencies happen. And when they do, we want you to be able to pay for those unexpected expenses using cash instead of relying on a credit card. You don't need to include expenses for anything you'd cut from your budget in the event of a job loss or major catastrophe. For example, like entertainment, eating out, non-essential shopping, vacations, saving for big purchases. Like if things were to go wrong, you probably need less dinero for flexible expenses. Let's say you need $2,000 to cover 1 month of living expenses. In order to save a 3-month emergency fund, you would need to have a total of $6,000. In order to save a 12-month emergency fund, you will need $24,000. That's a huge difference. This is why it's important to decide ahead of time how many months of living expenses you want to save for an emergency fund. How much you require is going to be reflective of your lifestyle. You may want to have closer to 3 months of living expenses if you have a really steady job, reliable housing, and no dependents. You're going to want to save around 6 months if you have dependents. And you'll want to save closer to 12 months of living expenses if you work in a high-risk industry where layoffs are common, or if your income isn't steady because you're self-employed or an independent contractor. Remember, you don't want your emergency fund to be too big because you risk losing your money to inflation. And inflation can vary from 1% to 3% a year. You don't want the value of your money decreasing, so don't keep more than 12 months of living expenses in a high-yield savings account. At the same time, it's risky to have an emergency fund that's too small, because then you're at risk of getting into debt to cover your unexpected expenses and messing up your credit score. Also, if your emergency funds are too low and you end up having to borrow to cover your emergencies, it's going to decrease your net worth. So make sure to have at least 3 months of living expenses in a high-yield savings account. Now, saving an emergency fund is going to take time. You want to put away a specific amount each week or from every paycheck towards your emergency fund, because poco a poco it will build up. You want to keep your emergency fund in an account that's accessible, but not too accessible. That's why we recommend a high-yield savings account, since it is an online account that will require a few business days to transfer the money into your checking account. And you won't be able to just spend the dinero when it's not an emergency. To find a high-yield savings account, do a quick Google search. Search for this month's best saving account and you can pick one with the highest interest rate. Now, remember, this emergency fund should only be used in case of an emergency. To ensure that your money is being used for the intended purposes, you should write out ahead of time what type of emergencies would cause you to pull dinero from this fund. Job loss, a medical emergency, a car accident, family really needing dinero, a reduction of work hours, etc. are a few things that you may want to write down on your list. Going on vacation is not an emergency. However, if travel is important to you, then make sure you save for it in a separate sinking fund. A sinking fund allows you to save dinero poco a poco towards some big goal. Possible goals can include a vacation, a new pet, a new car, a wedding, a house down payment, anything that you know that you want that is an expected upcoming big expense should be saved for in a sinking fund, separate from your emergency fund. Your emergency fund is for emergencies. Your sinking funds are for expected upcoming expenses that you know you need to save for poco a poco. Having both will allow you to cash flow expected and unexpected purchases without relying on debt. Let's review the key concepts of this lesson. You need an emergency fund saved with 3 to 12 months of living expenses in a high-yield savings account before you start investing. The size of your emergency fund should be calculated using your budget and reflective of your lifestyle. The less job security and more dependence you have, the more months of living expenses you should have saved in an emergency fund. Sinking funds are savings for expected upcoming big purchases that you should save separately from your emergency fund. Thank you for being here and learning about building your savings and your sinking funds. See you in the next lesson.